I think it's time to get spooky. There we go. Hi! I'm so glad you're here. It's officially spooky season and I'm very excited about all of the projects I've planned for Halloween. Last year the theme for my projects was reimagining fairy tales and nursery rhymes, and this year I wanted to get a little more spooky because I really enjoyed doing the special effects makeup on my Little Miss Muffet build, and I want to do more stuff like that. If I had to give this year's build a theme, it would be reimagining classic monsters. And to kick off this monster mash, I thought we would start with arguably one of the most iconic monsters, Frankenstein, or Frankenstein's monster. Earlier this year, I went to Epic Universe and I made an outfit inspired by the Bride of Frankenstein, where I made this dress, and you can watch that video here. And ever since, I've been a little bit obsessed with the whole tale of the Bride of Frankenstein, and I want this project to be kind of a mishmash of different interpretations, and this is what I've come up with. Now, I know at first glance it's not a whole lot to look at, but I've taken inspiration from the original description of the monster from the novel. I've taken some little inspirations from the movie itself, but the aspect of this I'm most excited to make was inspired by Dr. Finkelstein in Nightmare Before Christmas, which of course is a play on Dr. Frankenstein, in the way that I'd like to, like Dr. Finkelstein, be able to open my head and show my brain. Having said that, I do want to do some special effects makeup with this as well, with some fake stitches, which is common imagery with any sort of interpretation of Frankenstein's monster because he is bits and pieces sewn together to make someone new. So if all goes well, I hopefully will be making special effect stitching and a fake brain to open up and see. So if that's not your thing, I understand. I have other videos if you want something more cozy and more just fall inspired, and I completely understand, because if all goes to plan, I will have stitching and a cranium that I can open up. I don't know how I'm gonna do it yet, but hopefully that'll happen. Back to the design itself though. I know it's not a lot to look at because I kinda got stuck in a cycle of overthinking. I thought way too deeply about what she would be wearing because I kept thinking about where they would have sourced her from, and I thought, would these men have gone through the trouble of sourcing her a nice dress? Where would they have gotten it? If she didn't already come with it, would they have gone out of their way to get her a nice dress? I don't think he would have. So I went with a chemise, an underdress, that I thought somebody could have likely expired in already. Did I think about this for too long? Probably. Looking at my stash, I don't think I have the white cotton sheet that doesn't have some sort of print on it, so we'll be messing around with the chemise a little bit. And we definitely have to make it look a bit tattered and torn, so it will be fun to age and weather it. But the real fun will be figuring out the headpiece. So even though it looks very plain, there is a lot to do. So I'm going to go into the laboratory and get to work. To begin, I chose a bedsheet from my stash, the least flashy or colorful one I could find. These pale yellow flowers should stain just as easily as the rest of the sheet when we weather it later. And this sheet even comes pre-weathered. Then I consulted the Big Book of Wisdom. Yes, definitely the Big Book of Wisdom. For a chemise pattern, I referred to Mariah Patty's shift process, noted their methods, added my own measurements, and did the math. Then it was time to cut. But it wasn't long before I realized that I referred to the wrong numbers in my notes. But Dr. Frankenstein didn't quit when making his monster, and neither did I. The rather large neckline wouldn't be a problem, as it gets gathered anyway, so the scrunching would just be more dramatic than I planned. I added the sleeves to the side, as well as the gussets, embroidered the opening for the tie, and then made the tie. While I worked, I listened to Mary Shelley's famed novel in all its twists and turns, and then assembled the shift. I decided to add this lace trim around the waist to add a little bit of detail. And once it was all put together, it was time to rip it to shreds. Once I tried it on, I realized just how short I'd made it, which is undoubtedly a result of my poor mathematics when making the pattern. Nevertheless, I gathered as much tea as I could find, stirred it into some hot water the way a witch stirs her cauldron, under the watchful eye of my familiar as well. And tossed my chemise in for an overnight bath. The next day I grappled with the inevitable. The chemise was too short for my liking, and although I had not scheduled for the time it would take, I needed to make a dress to wear over it. The tea staining had done its job though, and I was pleased with those results. To make the dress, I used some brown polyester to make a rectangular skirt to gather at the underbust of a makeshift bodice I threw together, along with 2 puff sleeves. I wasn't worried about perfect construction, as the plan all along was to have the skirt and bodice torn apart on one side, and to make the giant rip on the other side, I simply didn't connect the ends of the skirt together. But that wasn't enough destruction for my taste, so I took my scissors to the dress and started chopping away. For the sleeves, I ripped one at the shoulder, away from the bodice, and shredded the other on the end. Then I took some brown paint and started weathering the dress. To dirty the shredded fabric, I dunked them all in my dirty paint water, which was the perfect combination of color, as the blue tinge that was already in there made it look slightly moldy. It's time to get a little gross. This is your last chance, dear viewer, to avoid seeing a brain and some stitching. To make the headpiece, I first measured my head and cut the frame out of cardboard, checking to see if it will fit over my wig. The idea was to make a headpiece that would look somewhat like a continuation of my regular black wig, so that it was important that they could be worn together. Then after making a form out of foil, I got to work sculpting the brain while watching the 1931 Frankenstein film. Once the form was covered, to make the wrinkles, I rolled out long tubes of foam clay and carefully laid them out on both sides.
It's alive!
While the brain dried, I added even more weathering to the dress. And once that was done, I called it a night. The next day, our brain was mostly dry, so I put on The Bride of Frankenstein and got to painting. This film was wild, in more ways than one. Bemused is an understatement, and I have a lot to say about this sequel, but we'll talk more about that later. After slathering the brain with Mod Podge, I used some secondhand hosiery to make some reusable stitching instead of relying purely on makeup. I used one stocking to make my right leg look sewn together by painting the separation on first, but while I was working, a rather large bug landed on my leg, scaring the daylights out of me. Continuing on, I then stitched some yarn into the tights and cut the other leg off of the same pair to make a stitched arm. This is when the bug made its presence known once more by flying into the side of my head, disappearing, then reappearing above me. I handled it with grace. And didn't overreact at all. My anxiety peaked, but the bug nowhere to be found. I got back to work, abandoning my initial plan to sew a glove by stitching around my fingers, and just chopped off the end entirely. While watching the 1994 Frankenstein, I stitched my arm together and removed the brain from its base. To be able to open my head, I needed a lid, so I made that out of cardboard as well, when the bug reappeared. This time very cheeky and right under my nose, but they were no match for my neck. I got it. To give the wig pieces something to cling to, I first lined the headpiece with felt and black velvet, and made the hinge using a strip of felt as well. It looked a little strange. But with the hair added, strip by strip, it started to come together. The movie I watched while working, however, made little sense and wasn't very enjoyable. That, however, did help me focus more on the headpiece, so after gluing every strip of wig hair on, I painted the inside of the head and put the finishing touches on the headpiece. Which means everything is done, and it's time for the reveal. I love it. I really like how this turned out. I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out once I tried the chemise on and it was too short. But we pulled it together, and even though I couldn't blend the latex very well, I do still like how the stitching looked. I'm a little out of practice with special effects makeup. I'm working with a tiny bottle of Spirit Halloween latex and eyeshadow. So I think I probably could have done a little bit better had I had some theater makeup, but I think it turned out pretty well. I kind of went down a Frankenstein rabbit hole this week. While making this, I watched 6 different Frankenstein films, so I thought I'd rank them from worst to best, just like I did in my Cinderella video. In 6th place, we have I, Frankenstein. This movie was like if John Wick was Frankenstein, and he existed in a fantasy story. That lore drops so much information on you in the first 30 minutes that you kind of just have to take their word for anything they say going forward, because not a lot makes sense and there's not enough context given to make things make sense. So you're just along for the ride. Gargoyles and all. Gargoyles. I did not like it. In 5th place, we have the apparently made-for-TV Frankenstein film from 2004. This followed 2 cops investigating a puzzling case wherein they unknowingly get entangled with Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster, but in like a modern-day sort of sense because they're still alive somehow after centuries of genetic alterations they've been giving themselves over the years. It was aggressively 2004 and not in a good way. The script was pretty bad, in my opinion. Maybe with some changes it could have been a fun ride, but so much of it felt forced, and there were several emotional points that were introduced but never really followed up on to give any sort of closure or development, so it just felt like a big waste of time and very loosely connected to Frankenstein. I didn't like it. In 4th place, we have Son of Frankenstein from 1939. This is the 3rd Frankenstein film in that little series, and I don't know. It wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. It wasn't campy enough to make it fun, and the story wasn't interesting enough to even discuss, really, so that's all I have to say about that. Although the kid was funny and made me laugh. His greeting was so over the top. The kid was probably the best part. Also, I forgot to mention how cool the sets and lighting are in The Son of Frankenstein. Is pretty fun. I also forgot about this funny part with the townspeople.
I'm so sorry that I don't remember him, because I've been told that he was a good man.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
In 3rd place, we have The Bride of Frankenstein from 1935. This movie was wild. I knew very little just from the very light research I did earlier this year, but I really wasn't expecting Dr. Pretorius's itty-bitty people that he created. There were like 6 of them, and it was just so weird and funny. The little king just really wants to be with the little queen so much so that he breaks out of his little glass cylinder to go to her, and she's not having any of it. She's so not interested interested. And there's a ballerina who only dances to one song by Mendel, and Dr. Pretorius is so unimpressed with his own creation. He's like, yeah, that song choice gets boring and repetitive after a while. It was very amusing, and the special effects were very fun. But the titular character was only on screen for less than 4 minutes. I timed it. I had heard that she was on screen for less than 5 minutes, but she was on screen for less than 4. At the very end of the movie, imagine you go to see Bride of Frankenstein and you're like, where's the bride? Oh, here comes the bride in the last 5 minutes of the film. I started timing from when her eyes opened and ended when after she's been ended. But I think I started it a little too early. I should have waited until she was fully on screen, not just her eyes opening. And I think I was delayed in ending it because I was watching the film and got a little wrapped up in it. But that time that I took was 4 minutes and 7 seconds, I believe, which means she was on for less than that. Justice for the Bride forever. In second place, we have the 1931 Frankenstein film. It's a classic and it deserves its accolades. It was very fun to watch, despite the major departures from the book. I had just listened to the entire audiobook before watching this, so it was hard not to compare the two, but the film's sets were so cool. It was a great film, visually at least. Boris Karloff is of course iconic in his performance as Frankenstein's monster, but goodness, is the storyline very loosely based on the novel. The ending had me cackling in disbelief, purely because it felt so odd and abrupt. Victor's in the back recovering, and the maids of the castle come giggling down the hallway with some of his grandmother's wine, and they're like, we think you would like some of this, and then the father's like, yes, I think he would, and then he comes out and he looks back at his son and he's like, he doesn't need this right now. To the son of Frankenstein! And then it's like the end, they toast, and then it ends. That was also a big difference between the book and the movie. In the book, his father is so caring and like supportive. In the film, he's this crotchety old man who really doesn't care at all about Victor's work or his education. I don't know why they made him such a jerk, but they did. It's just a very strange change. Now getting back on track. In first place, we have the 1994 Frankenstein film, and this interpretation was actually the closest to the novel, which I liked, though it did divert in some very key ways, particularly with how they portrayed Elizabeth's character. Even though I watched all of these Frankenstein films, the thing I enjoyed the most was listening to the audiobook. I had never read it before. I'd only had very light exposure to Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein, and of course Frankenstein's monster in pop culture in general. But one thing that surprised me about the novel was how well spoken the monster is. The novel is sectioned off into volumes. There's practically a whole volume where the monster is just telling Victor what he's experienced and done for the last 2 years, sharing everything that he's learned and explaining the experiences he's had that has led him to fulfill the imposed role of monster. He learns to speak by observing the cottagers, this family that lives in the cottage. He learns about the history of the world from them as well. He's very well spoken and articulate, and I don't think I've seen a version of him like that before. At least not until I watched the 1994 film, which does portray the monster in this way. I also didn't know that it is in the novel that the monster asks Victor to make him the bride. I didn't know she was in the book at all. I thought it was just a Hollywood reimagination, but he does ask Victor to make him the bride in the book, and he promises that if he does, he and his bride will go off and they'll never bother anyone again. But Victor's like, no, you'll get bored and you'll come back, and then I'll have unleashed 2 monsters onto the world, so I can't bring myself to do it. And he had started building the bride, but he destroys what he's already started doing and throws them into the lake, which of course the monster, who had been watching and observing, waiting for him to fulfill his promise, is very angry. That initiates this years-long hunt between Victor and his creation, and I was not expecting the monster to be so cheeky with how he eggs Victor on, because he like left him food. He's like, you're gonna need this. I'm like 2 days ahead of you. You're gonna need to refuel. So here's a rabbit. We're going somewhere cold. Here are some furs for you to wear while you chase me. I wish I'd listened to the book before I started, because my design would have been drastically different, because I wanted this to be what the bride might have looked like had Victor finished the job. But my clothing based on Regency fashion is off by about 50 years from when the book takes place, maybe even more. It does take place in the 1700s in Geneva for the most part, but she would have been sourced in Bavaria where he was studying. So she probably would have been in something closer to like 1700s German garb, but it was too late to change my plan. So even though I set out to make this seemingly what she would have looked like had he finished his work, it's actually pretty far off. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because I really like what I made. I had fun. I really love how it turned out, and if you do too, you can let me know by hitting the like button. And if you want to see what I'm doing next and join the channel, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to know when I post, hit the notification bell. YouTube will let you know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!